Product texts. Where does the journey take us? That's the title to the 5 theses I'm going to share with you that I've written down. And I'm not only going to communicate the thesis, but I want to give you some more insights about the things we would have to do to promote the reader, the consumer. And I'm going to speak about the reader from now onwards. We want to enter into communication with them and convey the context and the content of our texts. So let's get right away to the first thesis. We have a lot of content in the companies. A German fashion company has 120 authors writing product text. I'm not talking about the content marketing team. I'm talking about the product copywriters. We have customers who have 50 staff if they have international content they want to write. So large teams. And lately, the discussion has arisen with the same questions lately. Are you a cost center or a profit center, actually? And the automation of text, and to think about how can we make progress, how can we sell our products in a better way. This isn't necessarily driven about the wish to have more sales, but in many instances, this goes back to the possibility to cut costs, another €3 saved. And I think this is a mistake. And I can provide you with arguments, and I'm sure many of you will follow. Product texts are like relatives nobody likes. It's the uncle nobody wants to see, nobody wants to have. He isn't very nice or unpleasant, and product texts, that's the same. You need them, you don't want them, and they are expensive. And the nice thing about it is that it's an asset that has never been optimized in a consistent way in e-commerce. When we talk to customers, they tell us we have product tests that are delivered to us, or we just grab them somewhere. They are somehow produced. But this field of product text hasn't been optimized. And when I ask, what about templates for the homepage? Our customers used to tell us that for the homepage, there are 10, 15 different layouts, depending on the time of the year, depending on the campaign, depending on whether there's a raffle or not. So this homepage is very present, and it lends itself to making it useful for the customer journey. The same goes for category pages. There are many customers saying they have 4 or 5, 6, 7 different layouts for category pages, depending on the campaign, depending on the season, depending on whether there's a Christmas campaign or not, etc. And at product page, at the latest, the customers tell us there are 1 or 2 variants. One is left and one is the right part of the page, because they want to vary that, and that's it. This means in product pages, there's a huge potential where it hasn't been optimized yet. But this means if we invest just a little bit of energy, there would be huge levers we could use, very powerful levers, because that's when the customer makes the final decision. That's when the customer is standing at the shelf, at the supermarket shelf, in front of 5 different types of shampoo, or 5 different dishwashing tabs. This is when I make the final decision. I grab the product and I put it into my shopping cart. And this is a huge potential that has remained untapped largely. And as we're talking about costs, and as we're, instead of how to generate profit, how to generate more sales with our product pages, and to focus on that task, that's something that has to change, because it's not about reducing costs, but it's about making the customer buy. That is the first thesis. And the question would be how we can actually change this situation. And there are 2 possibilities I see. We need KPIs and dashboards. Within online marketing, it's become a habit to communicate through dashboards for our advertising campaigns. There's a dashboard for search engine optimization, and there a visualization and a visualized overview for many aspects about how many clicks does an ad produce, etc. That doesn't exist for texts. And there are hardly any KPIs in this field, the key performance indicators. I'm sorry for mentioning the acronym without explaining it. And the key performing indicators depict the performance of the team. It's not necessarily SEO that we have to measure, because that would be a requirement that the KPI is embedded in the company's target. But for instance, the conversions when the customers actually buy, or the sales that isn't the product that isn't returned, that could be a KPI. Writing a good text that sells is one aspect, and if it sells that very well, but at the end of the day, the customers are disappointed because they bought something they didn't want to have and they return the product. These are things that have to be taken into account. But in some instances, key performance indicators can be defined unequivocally, and we are a profit-driven team, is what we can say at the end. We are not a cost reduction team. And this shift in our mindset, this shift in our thoughts from one direction going into the other direction, it's very important, is a very important part of our discussion. Dashboards and KPIs is something that we take very seriously at AX Semantics. For quite a while we have released our dashboards. Our customers can buy them, and they are part of our personalized solution of AX Semantics, because this is an approach we really believe in, and we are absolutely convinced that what we are communicating is the right thing, and we have embedded it in our software as a long-term solution to open and to give the copywriters a new way of argumenting why it's really important to do certain things, and there are some things you shouldn't do. Let me mention the following. When I was working as a copywriter at Audi, Volkswagen, Mannesmann, mobile communications, or radio stations, I experienced some bosses. They said, Mr. Alkan, it's a great idea. Unfortunately, we can't implement it, because the person who's in charge of the advertising budget, that was what mattered, their opinion, and everything else wasn't taken into account. Now we can use data to prove our opinion, to prove our statement. And the statement that someone else is making, we can say, okay, we push that to the test, and then we can tell you if that's true. So we have a neutral possibility to discuss matters of style. We can discuss arguments about product texts based on data. And as soon as we can bring about that shift, we will get away of the statement, I'm of the opinion, or my opinion is, but we'll be able to sustain it in a neutral manner. So I hope that you share that the thesis that this is a good solution to change course. I'm convinced of it, and I will be pleased to touch on the next topic. Consume consciously. This is a very difficult group of people, these customers. They have their opinion, and they might change their minds. And here I quote from the Utopia study of 2020. 2021 wasn't available yet. In this study, they say the following: in this group of 18 to 24-year-olds, there's a profound change which is happening. It's a very important target group for many of us. But there's one thing that's also happening. The older age group, below 18, it's not that relevant for the consumers, but the people older than 24 are also changing. And we see trends as neo-ecology, for instance, that there's an awareness about sustainability, protection of the environment. This is very wide spread. We see all the discussions in the field of neurophysiology. I can use my watch that tells me how many steps I took, how healthy my heart is. All this made us consume in a much more conscious way. And the conscious consumer is the person we are in touch with. They buy our products. And the Utopia study focused on mobility and different areas, but it also affects furniture. It applies to vacations. It applies to all the different areas of life. I just mentioned one or two examples that they were giving in the study, but obviously we see that it applies to all the different areas, be it fashion, be it traveling, or other products our customers buy. So what does that mean? What does that mean for our product texts? I'm absolutely convinced that in future we have to use our product texts to be brand ambassadors and to see them that way. The message that we want to convey, we have to embed it in our product texts. Of course, we cannot mention our 37 corporate values in every text and our environmental commitment. No. But what we have to do is to embed certain aspects of sustainability, individual values of the company, if it matches the product, that we embed that in the product texts. Let me give you a simple example. Of course, a logo for a furniture store, I can embed it, or a certain certificate. There are some aspects where I can put the certificate, the logo, but I can also embed some words in the text. For instance, if this surface looks like mahogany, that would be a tropical wood. No, it isn't in our case. It's just a timber that looks like mahogany. And this strengthens the credibility that these values are important. And the same would happen in a store, in a brick and mortar store. If we sat on our couch and it's made of sustainably grown cotton, for instance, the surface. As soon as we sit on that couch in a store, this is what the sales assistant would tell us. And this is the same argumentation. We have to use it. Then we've got the experts for brand tonality and brand management at global level, and they might be telling us, but we have to separate the product and the brand. I'm of a totally different opinion. If I'm a retailer and I sell a product of a certain manufacturer and I can prove that sustainable cotton was used, for instance, for the upholstery, and that when producing a certain produce or food stuff, that sustainability is important in the production process. And that's what I want to communicate. And as a retailer, it's very important to me to do so. And this is what we've heard also in the surveys and in the studies. This is important to our customers and to customers in general. And if you take H&M and the surveys that was carried out when they changed the brand communication, they hired a new CEO, which comes from a sustainability background. If you're aware of the campaign, the new H&M campaign with the children, this is directed to the day of tomorrow and the world of tomorrow. And if they communicate this in their texts, in their product tests, this leads to a strengthening and not to confusion. I think that this is really important. This should be included, and this is something we should do. If it's written in an automated way or manually, that doesn't really matter. But it has to change. We have consumers who are much more aware, and this awareness has to be taken into account. I don't want to lead a unilateral dialogue when the customer tells me what it means to consume in a conscious way. I have to be able to offer this to our customer if it's relevant for my product. There's one thing, old patterns don't hold anymore. I was born in '69. My assumption is I'm one of the oldest today. And during my course of study, I learned that there are high involvement and low involvement products, and communication has to be different. And we have to be aware of the difference, because powdered soups and high quality rain jackets are sold following different patterns. And I'm really speaking about high quality rain jackets. These old patterns don't hold true anymore. Today, as there's this shift towards a more conscious consumption, it's closely connected to my second thesis. We have customers who, even if it's a powdered soup, they ask questions. And the answer is we have to give answers. And there are no unimportant product texts anymore. These times are over where we could say a powdered soup doesn't need a lot of text. There are just laws that apply, full stop. No, much more than in the past. Will it be necessary to have product text for minuscule target groups. So all in all, we need a lot of content. Why am I convinced about this? I'm convinced about this if I want to sell a powdered soup to a vegan, the questions that I asked are very different than if I discuss it with parents who want to have a low sugar diet for their children or a zero sugar diet for their children. And when talking to athletes who want to know more about the protein content of a certain product, all these are aspects that I have to give an answer to. I need to have an argument, and there has to be more than to discuss the low price of a powdered soup. No, the basic idea is that these questions can be asked at any point in time, and I need to be able to give an answer. And this means if I wanted to process that for all the target groups, the text will be very long. And this is going to be important in my last thesis. So we need a lot of content, and the content has to be coming somewhere from. It can be automated, and it also has to be consumer-oriented, reader-oriented. And this is a very important thing for me. No matter if we're talking about the 400 euros rain jacket or the 79 cents powdered soup. We have to be able to give an answer to that. And in a store, I would go to see the store manager to get the information I need about the soup. And I can't do that in the same way online. So this means that the information has to be prepared somewhere as soon as I'm on the product page and I'm reading the product text. There's another very important study. It sometimes seems that studies seem contradictory. There are many studies in the field of health and also in the field of reading. And here there are two different studies that I want to quote, the Gym study and the Swiss study. Both tackle the topic of reading. Ones come to the conclusion that young people read more, and others come to the conclusion that we don't understand texts anymore. And this is showing very well what's going on at this point in time. This is Jakob Nielsen, in the middle, the usability researcher who at the end of the 90s was very committed to looking into how people read when they read something from the screen, and how it has to be prepared so that it leads to understanding. Because in addition to perceiving the text, we also have to be able to process it. Only then can I understand the very important elements of a communication. For instance, the trigger of an action, buying the product, for instance, or understanding the content. And if you tell me that the powdered soup is free of sugar and that you can prepare it for the children over lunch as a quick snack, maybe I'm going to buy the soup because you explained it to me. But in addition to convey the message, I also have to be able to process it. And these two studies are not really as contradictory as they seem at first glance. What happens is that youngsters, adolescents, they read more digital media, but also printed books. Well, the pandemic also changed something here, of course. But on the other hand, reading using the screen is twice as tiring, and that's the content of the second study, we can't really understand the text because we don't process the content. In the case of a sugar-free soup, that might be easy, but if I want to buy a mountain bike that costs 5,000 euros to make use of the job bike offer made by our company, things get more tricky. And this is why we print these things out, because we prefer reading them on paper. And this is what Jakob Nielsen already mentioned at the end of the 90s. And I would like to give you some answers about how product pages should be prepared in future. First, we have a divided reading process. We have a second reading level, which we need so as to provide content to the customers. As you can see here, for instance, making statements, that's one thing. And if I install the second level and next to it, I do provide the content, and in bold, I write it in bold. This already creates this first level of reading. There's one level you start, you scan the content, you just scan through it. That's the positive thing about scanning, other than skimming. To use another term, this is just going through text quickly without reading the content. In scanning, the most important anchor points are put in bold, or you have bullet lists, you have small boxes with some special information. People scan this. This triggers the reader's interest to read. And if that happens, the reader sees, oh, there's something interesting. Only then does the reader read the content, processes the content, and I understand the text. This means we have to take care of the visual presentation of our product test. There will be more visual content, and we have to give easy access to the content. And if we do so, the customer can process the text, can understand it, and will act at the end and buy the product. There will be a renaissance of Jakob Nielsen's theory. They will become very fashionable again in the next couple of weeks and months. We have better devices, terminals, and as compared to the end of the 90s of the last century, the devices are clearly better nowadays. We can read with the text with our iPhone in a much better way. We have the high performance computers and processors that are omnipresent, and it's easier to read. But this led to the web designers to go back to produce black writing on a bright background, or black letters or white letters. And this is more difficult to read, and we as copywriters have to bring about this second reading level so that the text can be perceived and processed, and this can trigger a reaction with the customer. Only if I've understood it, read it, can I make an informed decision. Accepting the customer. We have a lot of data about our customers. We have an infinite amount of cookies. We count all the movements. We know the movement of the mouse. We collect it all. But what do we do with the information? We are unable to use these data triggers, these data points, to react to them in a constructive manner. We are overwhelmed with a flood of data. We turn them into clusters. There are personalization solutions with 3 customer groups, but then we don't need to collect data from 3 million customers if we only cluster them into 3 groups. What would be the key? Let's say we have so many customer data. I have to be able to react to that. This will be a good and a very important trend, which is that big data needs big answers. If we can't react to big data, if we only react by writing tasks manually, clustering only individual target groups, if we don't discuss personalization and automation because we just can't handle this content, human beings, I mean, we want to do something else than write product texts the whole day through. So the question arises, are we addressing our customers' needs at all? Or do we have to offer content to our customer that is more targeted and more tailor-made to the customer? Because the volume is getting too big. I hope you understand what I want to convey to you. On the one hand, we have to produce millions of contents, sugar-free, powdered soup, vegan, gluten-free, you name it. For powdered soup alone, I have 6 to 8 thoughts that we could communicate. And that's very nice because we can address the customer. But if I have to read a PhD of 20 pages before I can buy a powdered soup, things get tricky too. So I have to think about what would the customer be interested in. That would be the question of the store assistant. What would you like to eat? And what do you want? Then what would be a valuable product? If the response is, I want a valuable product. And then you can say, it's sugar-free. That's, for instance, what the customer says, and then the store manager can say, okay, this is the product you can take, it's sugar-free, and I don't have to discuss it half an hour. It's more specific. So, and now I'm transferring the idea of the supermarket to the product text. Let's say 79 cents a powdered soup. You don't expect people to read 2 pages. It might happen if we're talking about a computer that costs 3,000 euros. Everything that was considered to be high involvement in the past, there are more aspects to discuss and to ask. But I need the right amount of content tailor-made for the needs of the individual customer. And in my opinion, personalization and automation play a very important role, because otherwise we will not improve, we will not do better, and we will fall behind as compared to those who already come up with solutions. So this has been my presentation, 5 theses with hopefully 5 useful answers I've been able to give to you. I stand ready to answer any questions or accusations, praise or blame, but I'm going to stop the screen sharing now. Thank you very much, Saim. That was a great presentation. Very, very interesting for me personally as well. I'm not alien to the topic you're talking about, but the way you were able to express it in a very precise manner, from a cost center to the profit center, great. And yes, of course, everybody is allowed to ask questions. And you've got the chat. You can ask questions in the chat or use the hand raise or the Q&A function. Please ask questions that way. I have a question first, while we are waiting for other questions to come. Are you a cost center or already a profit center? In that vein, I imagine it as follows. If you have KPIs, you have a dashboard, and it's all great, and then you've got results, but the results are not good. I mean, you have to find out first what good actually means. How do you argue with these results? How can we get out of that spiral to be a cost center? Because the outcome could be that people don't want to invest anymore. That could be the counter thesis coming from the top. Well, we could say the content is so poor, we're going to throw it out. That would be a typical reaction of German CEOs. No, we've just experienced that with one customer. I'm not allowed to tell you the name, but we've carried out what we call the zero measurement. We took the site as it looks and the existing text, we carried out that zero measurement, and there are less than 4% of the customers who, so out of the customers who buy, not less than 4% have a look at the product text. And it was hidden underneath a second tab, the product texts, and they rather gave hardcore logistics data. The package and the parcel number, the order number, and then you've got a table, and that is the product description. And the customers buy because of the picture and the first tab, which provides the technical data. And they weren't able to watch the text or read the text because you couldn't see them. We changed the design of the website, and solutions are being looked into. And there's one thing we have to think about. It's never been optimized. That has to be the initial argument. As it has never been optimized, some minor work has to be sufficient to bring about an effect to generate more sales. And if we're all aware that it's never been optimized, and now we just start and look what happens and do it in a better way, this will bring about the patience that is needed, because that measurability and that transparency is what management wants, that the results are made transparent, the results that are possible, and how to improve them continuously. And nobody will expect the perfect product text tomorrow. Too much is happening at this point. There are too many mega trends we are faced with. There's this kind of cocooning again that the pandemic has brought about. Neo-ecology, young people are more critical in their attitude towards shopping. There are so many mega trends, there's a lot to argue, and there are so many things that have to be adapted. And this is the very important point I want to share with you. And from my point of view, this is, I want to convey that it's a serious discussion. We shouldn't come up with hurried results, like we're going to close everything down. It's not going to work anyway. I don't want to exclude it. I don't know all the CEOs in Germany. Well, the question also is, how can we start small-scale optimization projects from the very beginning to be able to show something, how much potential there is? Starting small would also be an idea. We just do it, we optimize certain things, and then we see previous and after. Yes, this is why we need a structural change, and this is what the consequence will be. If I automate certain things, I'm also able to react to new situations. There was this example, the automated warehouses that were used to dispatch. And an infection with corona isn't possible because the parcels are packaged in an automated way, and the driver is wearing a mask when providing you with the parcel, delivering it to you. This happened, and within just a few hours, you can include that in the product texts, and the customer can share that argument that it's safe. I can communicate these ideas faster. I see that a question has just come in. 2 questions. Great. Okay. What are they? Are there also trends or ideas in that the product texts are being read out loud? Research is done in this field. This brings us to voice-based internet. I can't give you the name because otherwise the Amazon lady will be mad at me. You have voice-based applications. This is going to be promoted. There will be more of that. But in the product text, if ever you listen to the Amazon lady reading out the weather forecast, how long it takes her to get to the point, the texts haven't been optimized, at least in my opinion, how fast I want to know what the weather will be like. When I ask colleagues, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? And my wife is sitting with me over breakfast at Mallorca. What about the weather tomorrow? It's cloudy. It's largely cloudy at this point. I don't want her to read out the weather forecast. I want to have the 2 facts, the hard facts. It's going to be sunny in the afternoon. In the morning, there are going to be clouds. That would be enough. And the same goes for product texts. We don't have that first reading level or that second reading level where we can emphasize things and then people dig into the text. This is why I cannot really imagine this to be a solution, at least not based on today's technology. I'm always cautious with formulations that it's never going to happen, but based on today's possibilities, it's not possible. But we could also provide shortened content when it's supposed to be read out. And if somebody wants it to be read out loud, there are devices that provide for that possibility. It can be made available. There are ideas, but it's not been implemented yet. And then there's a follow-up question. The KPIs, how can you control them in a way that you can assign the improvement in sales to the improvement in texts? So that's a causality issue. Statistics isn't always tackling the causes. What was the reason for the customer to buy? What made the customer buy? And yes, I sometimes read in between the lines. With a dashboard, we as working at text level, and if you're interested, please register for a demo with us. We'll be pleased to show you what the dashboard can measure. We don't have the conventional web analytics dashboards. We look into certain aspects. When is the customer dropping out of the product text? We really measure the product text. We are asked time and time again, can't I just use my web analytics? And then I've got the KPIs for my product texts. That's accurate, but you will never get to that point where the reader drops out, stops reading. You'll never find that out. For instance, is there a line where we can prove significantly that if we show that formulation, we lose 30, 50, 40% of our readers? They just drop out of the product page. And then it's due to that specific formulation. And if I change the formulation, I see that there are less than or fewer than 30% who drop out. And that is a remedy to the problem of dropout. So the definition of a KPI, can I make an impact on the conversion with the text? I think yes, we can make an impact on the SEO rankings and other aspects. The service queries can be, service requests can be reduced. I can claim that it's the case because there are studies proving that. And what we measure has to happen in the product text itself. I cannot measure a page with regard to the conversion and say the text has become better. No, there are too many impacting factors. We have to identify and separate. So we have to measure what we are able to make an impact on. This is text. We have to define the targets that we can achieve. For instance, if we are set to no index, meaning that the pages are not indexed by Google for the search engines, doesn't make sense to measure the organic traffic and claim that you can improve the organic traffic because the pages are not registered with Google. It's just a coincidence and doesn't have anything to do with the improvement of the texts. There's another question that has to do with that. What would be a possibility to measure the success? It goes back to that. Maybe you can make some remarks that are concrete. What can be measured to prove the success? What would you say? When is a text successful, and what will be assessed or measured in the dashboard? Well, we measure the different texts that are provided. In our personalization solutions, we have 6 different texts. A default content, that is the content that is shown in an untreated manner if a bot scans the page, or if there is no information about where in the customer journey we are. So we cluster the different texts, and then we cluster who reads, for instance. We can add measurement points, put them in the shopping cart, or a download of a document can be a conversion point. And these clicks can be diverse, and we can define them once in the system and measure them accordingly for their success. I hope that this answers the question. It's really important, and it was important in the first question already. I measure things that are going on in the text, that have to do with the text. A meta information, for instance, if it's not generated or not used, is something you shouldn't measure. We shouldn't measure pictures or videos. The only thing that's interesting to be measured is where am I in the content, and where does the customer go to after using the content, the text content, and where does this happen? So the location is very important. But I would also suggest you participate in a demo of the dashboard. That would be very useful. It's always possible, free of charge, if you're interested, and we can tackle the questions in a more detailed way. But this, we can show you how it works, and it gives a good possibility for each and everyone to assess it for him or herself. Okay, then we have another question. If a good copywriter would be a writer knowing the AX Semantics solution, well, that's the question we can also discuss afterwards, Pierre. We've known each other for quite a while. I can give you tips as well. In any event, we have many managed service providers. We can also, I don't know if that is really related to a specific person or a profile query. This is how I'd understand it. I'd answer at the profile level. Otherwise, we would like to invite you to meet with us and speak afterwards. What do they have to be able to do? We don't need any burned out developers. This is not what we're searching. I don't want any PHP programmers on our machine. We need copywriters who know their profession, who are real experts. This means has to do with grammar and the writing of content in general. People have to be really experts in that. And also a huge creativity. Technology enables us to do things that were unthought of until yesterday. For instance, emails can be individualized 100%. Or new arguments in product text can be used. We can adapt to the customers in a more specific way. So it would have to be someone who is strong in copywriting. And with regard to the technical equipment, the technical skills, I'd say it has to be someone who knows how to handle Excel. Nobody has to be a programmer. We build everything visually. We use rules. AX Semantics can also be really programmed. Our computer linguists love to do that. But working with the software itself and with the idea of how Excel has to be used was the different characters, smaller or equals, etc., all these symbols. This is much more important than the rest. And the rest is done during the software training when you're using the software. Like every time in life, nothing can happen without work, and you need a certain time to get used to using AX Semantics. 3 hours for an online training to know some first mechanisms, and then after 2 days, you can have the first automated texts, and then it's just about using it on a regular basis. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you also need some time to get familiar with Word and to know how to write some documents in Office. I think there was a reaction. All good, great, thank you. Okay, great, you understood it correctly. One last question we can answer here in this format. Oh, and if there are any questions, please write them to me later on, heike.hoppmann@axsemantics.com. I'm going to write it in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can answer it afterwards. One last question was, what is stronger, bullet points or normal text? Are there any rules that are important? There are many rules for good text. I mean, with the dash text, I'd say build it both with AX Semantics, continuous text, and bullet points, and see what the customers react more positively to. To give a one-size-fits-all answers, that wouldn't be the right thing. What we have with bullet points is that if we put something underneath bullet points, we put it into the second reading level where we provide the content, where we scan this content, excuse me, and to pull the customer, to attract the customer. If the list gets too long, this effect is lost. This is why it has to be short, 3 to 5 points max, and really measure it. And then we find out what works better for the customer. There are product categories that work better with one solution. Technical products are rather bullet point driven, for instance, and if you're talking about home textiles, maybe a continuous text is better. I can't really give you a one-size-fits-all answer. It depends. It's a typical answer, but I just gave you what I would do. I measure it first and then take things further.